He will kick us off.
All right, thanks, Jenny. So I'd like to say hello and welcome everyone to the first quarterly update webinar for the South Atlantic Coastal Study. Now, I'm Pam Castens, the Regional Project Manager for this study. And this study, which is known by the acronym SACS, was initiated in August of 2018 with a running time for completion of the final report of 4 years, or August of 2022. Now, the SACS is a regional study encompassing the 8 coastal states and territories of the Southeast, Gulf Coast, and Caribbean, aimed at identifying coastal storm risk and developing strategies to reduce this risk under future scenarios that are impacted by sea level rise. Now, since study initiation, we've held a series of stakeholder engagement activities, including vision meeting webinars, face-to-face field workshops throughout the study area, and numerous professional conference study updates across our area of responsibility, aimed at bringing to the study table as many of our interested stakeholders and partners as possible. So if you're new to the study, welcome. Please visit our study webpage for background materials, recordings of our prior vision meeting webinars, and briefings and general study overview information. Next slide, please. So our face-to-face field workshops, as I just mentioned, wrapped up just before the holidays this past year. Now, we're committed to continued engagement with our stakeholders and partners. So today's webinar will provide you, our external stakeholders and partners, with an update on study activities and accomplishments over the past 3 months since our workshops wrapped up. Now, we're also going to hear from our 5 district project managers about the activities and focus area analyses that are getting underway on the 8 state and territory appendices. Now, that said, we're not going to be providing today a broad study overview or introduction. So again, if you're new to the study, please visit our webpage or reach out through the study email box with any questions or feedback that you'd like to provide to us or our team. Now, again, as Jenny mentioned, we're going to be hosting some Q&A today via the chat function of this webinar at the end of our study briefs. So that'll give us an opportunity for some interactive dialogue. Next slide, please. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to do some quick introductions and set the stage by highlighting the shared vision statement guiding study rollout. Then our command center team will be briefing, just kind of giving an overview on regional technical activities and study products that have been completed and are underway, followed by an update from each of our district project managers on the state and territory appendices and the focus areas. Next slide, please. So again, we're going to start with some introductions. Pam Castens, Regional Project Manager with the Corps of Engineers, and I work out of Wilmington District. Lisa?
Good morning. This is Lisa Clark. I'm the Outreach Lead, and I work out of the Jacksonville District. Idris?
Good morning. This is Idris Dobbs. I'm the Economics Lead, and I work out of the Jacksonville District. Trevor?
Good morning. This is Trevor Lancaster. I'm the Geospatial Lead, and I work out of the Wilmington District. Kelly?
Good morning. This is Kelly Legault. I'm the Engineering Lead, and I work out of the Jacksonville District. Christina?
Hi, this is Christina May. I'm the Environmental Lead, and I work in the Baltimore District. Clay?
I'm Clay McCoy. I'm the Regional Sediment Management Lead, and I work out of the Jacksonville District. Matt?
This is Matt Schrader, Planning Lead for the study, working out of Jacksonville District. Brennan?
Hey, this is Brennan Dooley. I'm the Wilmington District PM for the State Appendix of North Carolina. Julie, sorry.
Hi, I'm Julie Morgan. I'm the Cultural Resources Specialist for the Charleston District team. I'm filling in for Diane Perkins today. Trevor?
Hey, Trevor, we can't hear you if you're talking.
It looks like Trevor is having some technical difficulties, so we can move on to the next person when we figure this out.
This is Ashley Fountain. Good morning, everybody. I'm the Jacksonville District Project Manager. Over to you, Meredith.
Good morning. This is Meredith Ledart. I am the Mobile District Project Manager for the SAC study. Lisa, over to you.
Good morning. So this is Lisa Clark again. And early last summer, the SAC team held Vision Meeting 2. We had a total of 13 workshops throughout the study area, a Fed agency-only meeting, and a tribal meeting. During the workshops, we presented 6 draft shared vision statements to the more than 300 stakeholders who attended. We received feedback on these statements and later followed up with an email where we asked you to vote on the preferred statement. Together, the shared vision statement you see here became our vision. The SAC's vision is to provide a common understanding of vulnerabilities to coastal storms and sea level rise to support resilient communities and habitats. This collaborative effort will leverage stakeholders' action to plan and implement cohesive coastal storm risk management strategies along the South Atlantic and Gulf Coast shorelines, including the territories of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Next slide.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. At this point, we'd like to move on to and turn to our discipline leads on our command center team for a brief summary of the recent study activities and accomplishments since we wrapped up our field workshops in December. You can see this list here. These are the highlights that we'll be providing you in terms of our ongoing and completed interim products. So we've got a lot going on, and we're really excited to share the highlights of our study program with you. Next slide, please. So our Tier 1 regional risk assessment, which our district project managers will be referencing throughout their upcoming briefs on their state and territory appendices, that risk assessment is complete and actually was the subject of a couple of earlier webinars as well as our field workshops last year. So we're not going to revisit that product here today, although again, it will be brought up and referenced a little bit later down the line. The Regional Sediment Management Optimization Study has now been completed, and Clay McCoy will be talking a bit about more about that also in a few moments. Clay's also going to give you a status update on the ongoing sand availability and needs determination, which is known by the fitting acronym of SAND. And our Coastal Hazard System database, which is under development, has reached an interim milestone that Kelly Legault is going to talk to you a bit about as well. Our study geoportal is now live. It contains some terrific information that is available to you at this time. And Trevor Lancaster, our geospatial lead, will talk a little bit more about what you can find there and what we have in the works. And then Idris Dobbs will review for you the outputs of the HAZIS model runs that provide estimates of dollar damages to infrastructure for the continental United States. Idris will also update you on the interim status of the Measures and Cost Library. Next slide, please. The Coastal Program Guide, Priority Environmental Area Identification, and Institutional and Other Barriers Report will be initiating this year. The Planning Aid Report from Fish and Wildlife Service has been received in draft, and Christina May will talk with you a little bit about an overview of the feedback that we got in that draft Planning Aid Report. And of course, the state and territory appendices are well underway, and you'll find out a little bit more about that from the district project managers. So at this time, I'm going to hand the mic over to Clay McCoy to begin the command center team briefs on regional sediment management.
All right, thanks, Pam. All right, so the 2020 RSM optimization update was completed in February and builds on the original 2016 RSM optimization. It's a report that highlights the current RSM actions throughout the division and provides a vision of where we're going in the future. So the RSM Center of Expertise is funded through the Coastal Navigation and Flood Risk Management Program, and nearly all the projects and recommended actions are things that we can do under our current authorities without new authority or additional approval from Congress. So the update provides a blueprint of how we most efficiently manage our coastal program from an economic and coastal resilience perspective. So much of the focus of RSM is on beneficial use of dredge material, which is generally achieved through coordination and collaboration with agencies and stakeholders to include project design, research, monitoring plan development, and after-action coordination to refine and further develop those strategies. The 2020 optimization evaluated over 70 projects throughout the region, and approximately 50% of dredge material from projects is already beneficially used. Everyone's pretty familiar with beach placement, but we also beneficially place dredge material in nearshore and estuarine environments, in marsh environments such as thin layer placement, and create and restore habitats. The update complements the measures and cost library, which is another SACS product, and it provides real cost and estimates for RSM strategies throughout the division, and it expands on the concept by calculating the value of RSM through money saved by combining projects and the value of additional storm protection. The report documents over $100 million in annual value that includes $20 million in value to Corps of Engineers beach projects and over $16 million in value to non-federal beaches, as well as important environmental and cultural resources such as national wildlife refuges, national monuments, and state parks. Looking to the future, the RSM Center will focus on expanding beneficial use of finer grain materials through strategies such as nearshore placement and estuarine and back barrier environments. The update identified significant value in developing these strategies, and we've been working with resource agencies to explore and expand on them. The report's available on the SACS website, so please download it and get in touch with me if you have any questions. Next slide. Okay. Sand. So another piece of the RSM puzzle is to find the sand needs in the beaches throughout the division and assess the additional sand sources, which include offshore sand, upland sand mines, non-federal RSM sources, and sand in dredge material management areas, or DMMAs. So this project started last summer and will be completed by the end of the calendar year. The team includes subject matter experts from all core districts, as well as representatives from state and federal agencies that manage the coastal zone throughout the division. We've currently completed data acquisition for the sand needs component for all beach projects, federal and non-federal, and are finalizing that data. We are in the process of reviewing the offshore data. It's primarily associated with Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection databases. Both of these project components have had extensive coordination and support from stakeholders and agencies. Okay. An increased area of focus for us here in the RSM program is our DMMA management. These are the large dredge spoil mounds adjacent to our navigation projects. They contain native sand and sediment from the coastal system that can be used for beneficial use to enhance resilience. Some contain sand that can be used for beaches or the near shore, and some contain finer material that can be used in marshes, intertidal, and subtidal areas. So we're looking for those opportunities to more efficiently manage our DMMAs and beneficially use the sediments within them. So finally, we have our technical working group in-person workshops in May that will go over all the project results before we finalize our report. So we will be sending out invites for that in the coming weeks. Next.
Hi, this is Christina May. I'm the environmental lead on the study, and I'm going to briefly discuss the planning aid report. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service prepared a planning aid report for this study, and the purpose of the report was to provide information on coastal ecosystems and biological resources in the SACS study area that are likely to be vulnerable to sea level rise and storm activity over the next 50 to 100 years. The report provides information on 63 national wildlife refuges located in the study area and provides a qualitative assessment of the risk to each refuge to storm activity and sea level rise over the next 50 to 100 years. So in general, the report concluded that coastal storms and sea level rise may result in widespread loss or degradation of coastal refuge habitats in the SAC study area. Loss or degradation of the habitats may result from sea level rise and accompanying saltwater intrusion that may change the marsh to open water. A change in hydrology or salinity in forested wetlands may change those habitats to marsh, and upland habitats may change to wetlands over time. The report also provides information on 191 vulnerable species, including birds, mammals, sea turtles, freshwater aquatic species, plants, and invertebrates. The report concluded that federally listed species, waterbird nesting colonies, migrating and wintering shorebirds, and other species of concern and their habitats are vulnerable to coastal storm damages and sea level rise. As Pam mentioned earlier, as part of this study, we are identifying vulnerable environmental areas, and we will use the information from this planning aid report to help us identify those areas. We also plan to have environmental workshops in late spring of this year, and the information from this report will be presented and used at the workshop. And once this report is finalized in June, it will be placed on our SACS website. All right, now on to Trevor Lancaster.
Thanks, Christina. Good morning. This is Trevor Lancaster, the geospatial lead from the Wilmington District. We have completed our Tier 1 risk assessment, as Pam mentioned. These data are viewable to the public on the Tier 1 risk assessment viewer that we've briefed in previous webinars. Additionally, all map services are publicly available with detailed methodology and source data sets in both the service and item descriptions. From the Tier 1 risk assessment, we identified the potential high-risk areas. These were provided to the district project delivery teams for consideration and use in their respective state and territory appendices. In progress, working on a Tier 1 dashboard that dynamically displays exposure elements to the census tract level for use by district project delivery teams in their appendices and focus area action strategies. Additionally, we are working on a web mapping application that will help to visualize HAZUS outputs for dollar damage risks for coastal flooding, which Idris Dobbs will discuss in a few slides. In the future, we'll be standing up an ArcGIS online sites page to allow for the public to discover and download geospatial data from the SACS effort, an open data hub. Additionally, we will be developing web mapping applications for the sand availability and needs determination, which Clay just mentioned, as well as the measures and cost library, which Idris Dobbs will mention here shortly. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kelly.
Thank you very much. This is Kelly Legault, the Engineer and Technical Lead for the SACS. The Coastal Hazard System, otherwise known as the CHS, is a high-fidelity system of integrated numerical models that ultimately determine coastal storm surge for the 5 years through the 10,000-year storm under present sea level conditions and under plausible sea level rise conditions for 50-year and 100-year time horizons. The results of the CHS will help inform coastal engineers and planners of possible future storm conditions under sea level rise. Today, I'm presenting the model for the Caribbean Basin. The storm inputs not only include historical storms, but all plausible storms that could be expected in a region. Whereas the existence of hurricanes is common, a direct hit by a hurricane is rather rare. So both historical and plausible input storms are combined to more fully represent input storm conditions. The C-storm model system numerically simulates tropical and extratropical storms to determine local storm surge and storm wave characteristics under present sea level conditions and under sea level scenarios to the 100-year horizon. Next slide. An example of the Coastal Hazard System output is the annual exceedance probability for the 100-year storm for Puerto Rico and USVI. And that's what's shown here on the left-hand side of the screen. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, we see the water surface elevations from the existing 2009 flood information study. The CHS results are somewhat higher resolution and will also include sea level rise conditions of 2.33 feet and of 7 feet. At this time, we have coastal hazard system results for Puerto Rico and USVI water surface elevations and also wave characteristics, including significant wave height and peak wave period for the present 2.3 feet and 7 feet of sea level rise above the 1992 mean sea level. And now we can go to the next slide. Idris.
Hi, my name is Idris Dobbs. I'm the economics lead on the study, and I'm going to speak to you briefly about the HAZUS effort. For many who don't know, HAZUS Multi-Hazard is the FEMA loss mitigation tool that's used to understand damages from flooding, earthquakes, and other disasters for which you would need to prepare and evacuation plans and so on and so forth, or estimate damages for. We ran HAZUS for the entire SAD area of responsibility to include North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. We have risk estimates of annualized depreciated losses distributed at the census block level for existing and future condition risk estimates. And the reason we ran this was so that we would have the ability to determine the relative dollar damage risk over space, to be able to provide some screening level analysis of damages of relative risk in order to compare those to the cost of risk reduction measures, primarily from the measures of cost library that I'll brief in the next slide, and provide input on relative dollar damage risk when we get to the focus area action strategy. So the HAZUS Multi-Hazard runs represent a Tier 2 effort for the study. So right now, we are complete on all the continental United States HAZUS runs. We're looking at completing the Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Island runs by mid-March. We're currently working on refinement of the web app for USACE applications for use in the remainder of the study, and the development of a public-facing web app to be able to provide this data and information to the public. Next slide, please. So this is the measures and cost library, which is another output mentioned previously. What this is a development of risk reduction measures and their associated unit cost linked to shoreline types, with consideration made for different locations around the area of responsibility. So different costs and different designs were factored into the ultimate development of the cost for this tool. All costs are represented as a range in current price levels. The measures we developed are aimed at reducing risk to populations, assets, infrastructure. The types of measures we use are non-structural, structural, natural, and nature-based features. So the reason that we did this was to provide some input into the focus area action strategy development for the SACs, and to provide some screening level cost analysis for future efforts. So we are working on internal testing by the team, hopefully to be completed by this week. Rollout of the tool to the districts by the middle of next week. We are planning a review of the measures and cost library tool by people outside of the team. And eventually, as Trevor mentioned previously, we're going to develop a publicly available web-facing tool so that this work would be available to the public. Next.
Okay, thank you, Idris. The SACS team held 14 field workshops throughout the study area late last fall. This was an opportunity to gather knowledge and feedback from you, our stakeholders. There were 4 breakout sessions, which included a review of the maps of the draft focus area. A little later, the project managers will discuss more about this and the way ahead. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Lisa. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as Lisa just described, input at those workshops was key to helping districts determine the final focus area boundaries and that's what's shown on the slide right now. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background into the focus areas, and later on, the district PMs will provide more detail on focus areas in their district. So as you all know, the Southeast has a significant number of areas that are currently at risk from coastal storms, and that number only increases with sea level rise. So while all at-risk areas can't be included in focus areas, it's really important to note that the tools and methods that are used in the focus area action strategies can be applied in all at-risk areas by stakeholders. So therefore, focus areas will serve as basically as examples of how stakeholders can address risk. So it's important to have a diversity of areas where population, infrastructure, environmental and coastal resources are vulnerable, and have those represented in the different focus areas, as well as having focus areas that kind of cover the gamut of geographic settings, meaning a variety of open coast, back bay, estuarine, and tidally influenced riverine areas. So to briefly describe how the areas shown on the screen were developed, districts took 5 draft focus areas into the stakeholder workshops, which, as Lisa said, were held in the summer and fall. Those drafts that the districts took to the workshops were based on existing and future risks that is depicted in the Tier 1 risk assessment, which was shown earlier on the product slide, and also based on stakeholder efforts within the areas to address risk and other criteria. So at the workshops, as well as outside of them, stakeholders gave input on the areas based on local knowledge and information. Districts then revised their draft areas based on that input, and the revised areas were prioritized across the entire SAC study area. Again, the final focus areas that came out of that prioritization are the ones that are shown on the screen. There's approximately 2 per state and territory. Given the shoreline length and coastal risk within Florida, Florida has 5 focus areas. It's important to keep in mind that there's still some flux in the specific geographies, and they may be refined as districts kick off the focus area action strategies with stakeholder groups. So I'm going to now, I just want to correct myself. Florida has 7 focus areas. I apologize, I said 5. So I'm going to now hand it off to Brennan Dooley from Wilmington to kick off the district updates.
Thanks, Matt. This is Brennan Dooley. I'm the project manager for the Wilmington district. Let's see if my slide will come up. There it is. All right. As explained earlier, the Tier 1 analysis of SACs was conducted with the regional risk assessment. And as Trevor mentioned, this pointed out high-risk areas across the region, which we used kind of as a starting point. Our team has since been focused on the Tier 2 analysis, which has involved the use of additional state-specific data sets. So paired with the risk assessment that we have from Tier 1, we've used this new additional data, or not new, but existing additional data to further define hazard, risk, and vulnerability in coastal North Carolina. Specifically, some of the data sets have addressed wave attack, erosion, and saltwater intrusion. This has allowed us to produce a list of additional high-risk areas that weren't picked up in the Tier 1 risk assessment. So as mentioned earlier, we've had a series of workshops. North Carolina, we had 2 in the fall, this past fall. The first one was in northern part of the state in North Carolina, in the Outer Banks, and the second one was in Wilmington. Many of you on the call now may have been at either one of those, and we really appreciate that participation. We heard similar feedback during both meetings. Some of the feedback was related to things like saltwater intrusion and lack of coordination between stakeholders and various levels of government. Some of the most important things we heard during these meetings were about existing conditions, areas that might be good for potential projects, and information about ongoing and planned resiliency efforts. This information has been huge in shaping and guiding our Tier 2 analysis. So Matt was talking about focus areas and kind of how the selection process went. Based on our feedback, the final focus areas for North Carolina are Dare County, Carteret County, and New Hanover and Brunswick combined as one. focus area. Currently, we're working to develop stakeholder working groups in each focus area. The plan is to meet in each focus area with these groups this summer to plan and develop, or to start planning and developing the focus area action strategies that Matt was mentioning. This is going to be one of the main outputs. These focus area action strategies will be one of the main outputs from our state appendix. I do want to say that I do want to make the point that this is not to say that high risk areas that are not included in focus areas, or it's not there, what I want to say is that the high risk areas that aren't in focus areas will not be left out of the report. We still have the ability to look at these areas and make recommendations in these high risk areas that don't fall under the focus areas. So moving to interim recommendations, to date, we have already passed some recommendations based on what we found so far through Tier 1 and Tier 2 and stakeholder feedback. We've passed these up to the SACS command team for further consideration and action. An example of one of these was to conduct a sediment characterization study for the state of North Carolina, possibly through one of our authorities, such as the Planning Assistance to States program. These recommendations can also point to specific needs of stakeholders and justify funding requests for these projects. That's all I have for Wilmington District. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for being on the call and your participation. I will now pass it off to Julie in Charleston. Thank you.
Thank you, Brennan. I'm Julie Morgan. I'm a team member on the Charleston SACS study. And as I said before, I'm filling in for Diane Perkins, who's the project manager. I'd like to provide you today with a short summary of our progress to date. Charleston District held a field workshop with stakeholders in REACH South Carolina 3 at the Coastal Carolina University Coastal Science Center in Conway in September of 2019. The meeting was held when the team was working on the Tier 1 analysis for this study and getting ready to move to Tier 2. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a list of some of the participants. We had good participation from the cities in the REACH, Conway, Myrtle Beach, North Myrtle Beach, state agencies, and federal. Next slide. Likewise, we had a meeting in South Carolina 4 in Charleston at South Carolina DNR's MRD auditorium, also in September of last year. Planning REACH 4 starts at the Santee River and extends south to the South Carolina-Georgia border. We had 24 stakeholders who attended the workshop, and again, you can see a list of the participants on the right side of the screen. The intent of these workshops was to get input from local experts and potential partners on the problems and issues they're dealing with due to coastal storms and sea level rise. The district was seeking information that would help identify future and interim study recommendations, as well as data sources that could be used in the subsequent Tier 2 analysis. Next. As I mentioned earlier, the stakeholder meetings were held while the district was conducting the Tier 1 analysis for the state. The figure on the left shows the composite potential coastal risk for the South Carolina study area. Information used to generate the composite risk includes population, infrastructure, environment, cultural, and social vulnerability data from national data sets. This was publicly available data. You can see on the graphic the high-risk areas, which are shown in red, the high-moderate risk in orange, and the medium risk in the lighter green. High-risk areas are found in the Myrtle Beach Grand Strand area, the Charleston, North Charleston, and Beaufort areas. As the team moves into Tier 2 analysis and reporting, additional data will be incorporated into the analysis. For example, cultural resources data in Tier 2 includes archaeological sites, resources that are eligible for listing, as well as those that are ineligible. Previously, we used only National Register listed and National Landmark sites. We're also updating the hazard descriptions to include wave attack and beach erosion rates. Tier 2 also includes HAZUS information, and you heard Idris talk about HAZUS earlier. This data is focused on economic damages. These high-risk areas would be in highly developed and densely populated areas. The figure on the right shows the high-risk areas using the HAZUS information. You'll note that the Charleston area, which is in the middle of the graphic, shows as a large high and high moderate risk area with lots of red and orange. The Beaufort area shows as a high/moderate risk area, and Hilton Head is a red area, a high risk, using the HAZUS data. Next. Charleston District will be analyzing 2 focus areas, one from each reach. The Grand Strand area is limited to the coast and was delineated based on stakeholder feedback requesting we do not blend the coast with inland areas because they're experiencing different types of flooding. The Charleston metro area will be another focus area, and it's rather loosely defined at the moment, but will likely be the Tri-County area. These focus areas not only address the 2 highest risk areas in South Carolina, but provide a variety of environmental types such as beach, marsh, and hardened waterfronts. They have both highly urbanized and rural development and include coastal communities as well as inland and upstream communities. These focus areas will have both the strategies and the measures that can be transferred to communities further inland like Conway or Georgetown, and others that are not in the focus areas. Also listed on this screen, you'll find a partial list of the 15 interim study recommendations the team developed using the information from the stakeholders. I'd like to point out that these studies are located across the state and not just in the 2 focus areas. Charleston District looks forward to working with stakeholders while we continue work on the focus areas and also while we complete the state appendix. Everyone will benefit from remaining engaged whether you are located within a focus area or not. The interim projects are a prime example of why remaining engaged is so important. Please continue to send information on future studies or recommendations to Diane Perkins, and her email is listed on the screen. Thank you for your participation in our previous meetings, and we look forward to future engagement. And now on to Savannah District and Trevor Knowles.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning. My name is Trevor Knowles. I'm the project manager in Savannah, assisting with the SAC SAND effort. I'll be briefing on behalf of April Patterson, the project manager for the Georgia Appendix. Thank you, first of all, to all the Georgia stakeholders who participated in the in-person meeting on October 30th at Tybee Island. At that meeting, we went over the Tier 1 analysis, broke out into groups to discuss the quality of the data and the problems that we are solving in our Georgia communities. We've gathered additional data from Skidway Island Institute, UGA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Fish and Wildlife Services, census data, and other sources to begin the Tier 2 analysis. The 2 focus areas have been established based on the Tier 1 risks and problems and opportunities in those areas. The first being Chatham County, including Tybee Island. The second being Glenn County, which includes Brunswick, Jekyll Island, and St. Simon Island. We're currently scheduling meetings in each focus area and looking for meeting hosts. So please let April Patterson know if you would like to host one of those meetings. The next slide is a list of our interim study recommendations across Georgia, the Georgia study area. This table shows a map of the locations located on the left. It also shows the possible source of material, proposed placement strategies at each location, and a short project description. These recommendations came out of our discussions at the face-to-face meeting at Tybee. Some of these recommendations will use RSM and SAND sources as identified in the table. Other projects will be studies and will evaluate measures for reducing erosion, improving drainage, and improving resilience to coastal storms. These recommendations are preliminary, and we are looking forward to improving upon and generating additional projects to record the conclusion of the study. That concludes my update, and now on to Ashley.
Hey, thank you, Trevor. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ashley Fountain, and I'm the project manager in Jacksonville District. which covers Peninsular Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I sit in Jacksonville, Florida, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to recap our field workshops that we had at the end of last year. So on the slide, you'll see that we had 6 workshops, and we had close to 200 stakeholders from all levels of government, nonprofit, academia, among others. A great mix for what we're trying to accomplish here with this study effort. We received a lot of great feedback that our team has been working to compile. So I'll get to that on the next slide, but we were able, not yet. Okay, thanks. We were able to actually team up with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or NFWF, for our Puerto Rico and USVI workshops, as we had similar goals for outreach and overlapping stakeholders. So this was an excellent opportunity, and it worked out great as we were able to maximize folks' time. If possible, we'd love to be able to do this again if there's an opportunity to do so. I did want to say that we do have workshop summaries that we can share with you. If you're interested, my email is down there at the bottom of the slide, so please feel free to reach out if you'd like to read about the feedback provided in a little more detail. So on this next slide, I'll just talk about the key topics that came up at the workshop. So on this slide, the bolded text in blue are the 4 small group breakout sessions that we had at our workshops, and I thought it was really important to take some time to kind of go through this and just kind of explain where we've been and the work that our team has been doing and trying to understand all of that feedback we received. So we had those 6 workshops kind of in a short time frame there, so we've been sifting through everything and incorporating that into our state and territory appendices. We received a lot of great information about the existing and future conditions and problems and opportunities. Particularly, one item of importance that was brought up quite a bit was older infrastructure. So particularly utility infrastructure, so water supply, treatment plants, and also septic tanks. It was surprising to our teams that in Florida, this came up at every single one of our workshops. The next topic here that we had at our workshop was the existing and planned risk reduction strategies. And so a lot of great products were brought up that our stakeholders have across our region. And so we're using the information about the existing and planned efforts, and we've been compiling that list, and it's been really great to learn about all of the different products that are going on, all of the vulnerability analyses, and how we can tie this all together. Institutional and other barriers to reducing risk. So Pam talked about that institutional and other barriers report when she was talking about the key products. And so some topics that came up across the board were that there are a lot of efforts ongoing for sustainability and enhancing resiliency, but that coordinated effort is really what it seems people are looking for. So hopefully SACS can play a role there. And also lack of funding was something that also came up, which I'm sure we're all aware of, trying to maximize the dollars that we have. On the next slide, I'll talk about the focus areas, which was the last small group breakout session. And so I just want to share with you the focus areas for Jacksonville District. Thanks. So Jacksonville District has 9 focus areas, 5 in Florida for the district, and then 2 in Puerto Rico and 2 in the Virgin Islands. We went out to our workshops with draft focus areas, and so on this slide, you'll kind of see color coding. So our Northeast Florida focus area is in the red hues. East Central Florida is purple, and this presentation will be available afterwards, and I believe actually Lisa Clark sent it out in advance today, so you can zoom in if you'd like here. Our Southeast Florida focus area covers the 4 counties in the Climate Compact, then Southwest Florida, and then we have our Tampa Bay region. So those are our 5 for Florida. And then for Puerto Rico, we have Isabela to Rincon and Cabo Rojo. And for the U.S. Virgin Islands, we've got Christiansted and Charlotte Amalia. So what really went into the decision on kind of the revision of the focus areas was really kind of the feedback that we received in the field. So that weighed heavily into the decisions on any revisions for our focus areas, and also just making sure that we are in line with the study authority. And the Tier 1 risk assessment. So as the previous PMs were saying, we look forward to setting the workshops up and talking with all of you in further detail about action strategies within these focus areas in the spring-summer timeframe. So if you're in one of these focus areas and you've got a venue that you'd like to host, please let me know. Thank you so much.
Great. Good morning. This is Meredith Ledart. I am the PM for Mobile District. Our area of responsibility within the South Atlantic Division runs from Apalachicola, Florida, westward all the way to the Pearl River in Mississippi. So we held 3 workshops, one in the Panhandle of Florida, one in Biloxi, and one in Mobile. We really appreciate the support that we got from our stakeholders, and I know there were some folks that weren't able to come, but we will still be reaching back out to you as we start scheduling our focus area workshops. A couple of the key takeaways that we had from those workshops, it was really apparent that it's not just us focusing on the threat of sea level rise and coastal erosion and coastal storm risk, but our stakeholders are addressing that as well, whether it's at the local or at the state level, and working on plans to address those problems. Another key point that we heard was, improving coordination with ongoing coastal resiliency efforts, and that's one of the things that really makes SACS a unique study, because it is a large focus on collaboration and coordination and leveraging all levels of resources that are available. The other key point that we heard at all of our workshops was that, a lack of funding is a critical barrier to implementation. A lot of our stakeholders do have plans that could be implemented to address a lot of the problems, but there is definitely a lack of funding to implement those. Since the workshops have ended, as some of the other PMs have mentioned, we've been doing our Tier 2 data collection and analysis. So that includes incorporating the HAZUS data that Idris spoke about. We also, in Mississippi, we've had the Mississippi Coastal Improvements Program, so we've been leveraging the information that we had from that study to inform our analysis, as well as the work we've been doing in Alabama with the state on the Coastal Comprehensive Plan. And when we presented our focus areas at each of these workshops, we took into account, the feedback that we did hear from our stakeholders. So the Mobile District, so stretching from Florida to Mississippi, we have 5 focus areas. 2 in the Panhandle of Florida. One includes Panama City and Mexico Beach, and the other one includes Pensacola, Fort Walton, and Destin area, which are both of those are each adjacent to a couple military installations. So we've been coordinating with those folks, as well as reaching out to them. In Alabama, the final focus area that was selected was the western shore of Mobile Bay, and then in Mississippi, we have 2 focus areas. One is kind of the greater Pascagoula area, and the other is the Gulfport, Biloxi area. We will be scheduling workshops starting in the late spring and early summer to work on our focus area action strategies and going down the field and doing some site visits. So we really appreciate everybody who's given up their time and their resources to work together on this, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon and working on our action strategies. So thank you all very much. Pam, back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Meredith, much, and thanks to all the project managers in the districts and for doing a great job with your updates on the state and territory appendices. and also to the Command Center team folks for your regional product briefs. So just for a quick look ahead right now on what's coming up in our study program, Christina mentioned that the environmental workshop or workshops currently are scheduled for the May timeframe, in which our study team will meet with the federal and state environmental partners and primary stakeholders in each state and territory to coordinate and try to achieve consensus on an understanding of vulnerable environmental resources and priority environmental areas for risk reduction. We do expect the final Fish and Wildlife Service Planning Aid report in June, and our workshops in the designated focus areas will roll out in late spring and primarily summer timeframe. Hazardous modeling for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands is expected to wrap up in July, and the SAND report will be complete and available on the SACS webpage in November. So just as a reminder, our complete SACS draft report package will be posted and available for review in October 2021. So between now and that time, again, we've got a lot of interim products, technical products, and information that is going to be kept live in our GeoPortal. So there's a lot that's going to be happening between now and October of 2021, but we are keeping our eye on that as a key date relative to our draft report product. So our next quarterly update webinar is kind of targeted for sometime this coming June, about 3 months down the line. So now I'd like to turn things over to Jenny as we transition into the Q&A portion of our webinar. I see we have a great list of comments and questions that have been sent to the team. So let's move into the portion of our webinar where we can provide some responses back. Jenny?
Great, thank you. And thank you to all our attendees who have been submitting questions. Please go ahead and keep your submissions coming. I was kind of going to go ahead and go in order, grouping some of the questions if they came in under the same category. But some of our initial questions were on the SAND analysis and product. So Clay, this will probably be for you. Someone asked, what % of the beneficially used material has been beach replenishment?
Hey, thanks, Jenny. For this analysis, it looks like about 11.4 million cubic yards, or about 16% of the total material dredged.
Great. And then there was another SAND question asking, when will the report be available? Do you have a time frame for that?
SAND report should be available by November, December of this year.
Great. We'll move to a few questions. Pam, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think Clay's the right person to address those questions. So that's good, Jenny. Thank you.
Great. We also had a few questions on the GeoPortal. So Trevor, I'd probably put these over to you. We had a question just if you could provide a little bit more detail on where people can access that GIS viewer.
Sure, yeah. If you go to our study homepage, which is on our SAD, South Atlantic Division website, there is a links page, and there's a link to the Tier 1 Risk Assessment Viewer on that page.
Thanks, Trevor. And I just want to point out that the very last slide in this presentation does contain the address for our webpage. So if you go to that webpage and hit the tab for links, you'll be able to access the link to the GeoPortal.
And I believe there was also a question that came in asking if via that web portal, the boundaries for the current focus areas, would those be available there?
Yes, we'll be making those available as well through there. They're not currently up there since we have just kind of recently finalized the focus area boundaries, but they will be published and they will be accessed via ArcGIS Online and in our web mapping application products.
Great. So our next series of questions kind of came in about the HAZUS discussion. One participant said that this information is really important for local community reports and planning information. So they were asking where could they get that HAZUS data, and will it be in GIS or report form only?
This is Idris Dobbs. It's going to be in report form, and it should be available by web mapping application. When that's going to be is to be determined, but we have plans to make that available by web map.
Great. There was also another HAZUS question. Is there a plan to rerun HAZUS and the measures and cost library when some of the other simulations are complete to estimate damage risk with storms and sea level rise scenarios? This person said that would be helpful to identify measures that would be most useful to mitigate future losses.
So we have future losses, annualized risk already built into the current estimates. The CHS is being used to generate the HAZUS outputs for Puerto Rico and USVI, but there are no plans to rerun the continental US with CHS inputs at this time.
And Jenny, this is Pam. I just kind of wanted to add to what Idris said. Our coastal hazard system program element has kind of a long running time on it as well. So as Kelly talked a little bit about the data that was available from the Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands, the Southeast Atlantic and the Gulf Coast basin development under coastal hazard system, again, it's got a little bit longer fuse relative to our completion timelines. So we're working with the information that we have right now to keep our products moving forward relative to wave and water level information. I think if there's an opportunity at the back end to maybe do some sensitivity runs on HAZUS using coastal hazard system, you know, if the time is there to do that, we might consider doing that. At this time, we're really not sure we're going to be able to. But I think it's an excellent question, and you know, we appreciate that as a recommendation.
All right, our next question asked to please explain what sea level rise estimates are being used. Are they the intermediate and high estimates or something else? What is the year of those estimates? Is it all the way out to 2100 or something else? The two sea level rise estimates were mentioned for the Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. Are there other estimates for the 5 states?
Hey, this is Kelly Legault. So for Puerto Rico USVI CHS runs, we use the Army Corps intermediate curve to 2120, which was 2.33 feet, the average of all compliant gauges in the Caribbean. And then we use the USACE high curve out to 2120, which came up to 7 feet. Again, this was an average for all of the gauges in the Caribbean. For all of the CHS runs, we're putting together an average. So as some may or may not know, the land subsidence is differential across each of the basins. So we need to have an average and a standard deviation in order to best estimate what sea level rise elevation above 1992 MSL would be most appropriate. So for CHS, again, we calculate for each of the basins the 100-year on the intermediate curve and the 100-year at the high curve. Now, for Tier 1 and for HAZUS analysis, we use 3 feet of sea level rise above 1992 MSL across the board. There were 2 reasons for which we had done this. Number one, we wanted to remain consistent with the North Atlantic Coastal Comprehensive Study so that we could have a uniform view of what risk would be incurred down the entire East Coast on the Atlantic side. The second reason is because we wanted to estimate a very plausible scenario for sea level rise, where a sea level rise could be bound at this point either by the USACE curve, which we're using, or by the new NOAA high curve. That would provide an envelope for an expectation. But for real plans on the ground, we wanted to look at a plausible value, so we selected 3 feet. For the focus areas, we will be asking each of the districts to look at the USACE curves, the intermediate curve and the high curve. We also can take a look at the NOAA high curve, which is about 2 feet higher than the USACE curve as far as eustatic sea level rise is concerned. So that will be worked out amongst the district PDTs in coordination with stakeholders so that it would be beneficial if we were all working from the same curves and that there would be some coordination to that effect.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Our next question involves kind of the focus areas selection and how maybe the criteria differed from the earlier North Atlantic Comprehensive Coastal Study. So the question is, the use and identification of the SACS focus areas appears to be distinct from the 9 focus areas identified in that previous NAC study. Is this correct? For example, the 9 NACS focus areas were areas where there was not an ongoing core study. Some of the SACS focus areas appear to overlap with existing core studies, such as the Florida Keys. Please clarify the purpose of allowing overlap between SACS focus areas and existing studies or projects.
It is Matt, I can take that one. So key to note that the SACS is using the Corps' watershed planning guidance, and then NACS wasn't specifically operating under that guidance. What watershed planning guidance means is that you look at what all stakeholders can bring to the table, not just what the Corps can do. So for us, it was important not just to identify areas where additional core projects might be warranted, but other local, state, other federal agency resources can be brought to the table to address the risk that's evident within the focus areas. So as was mentioned, some of the focus areas do overlap existing core studies. The Keys was mentioned. The study that's going on in the Keys is for a small portion. That focus area envelops the 4 Southeast Florida counties, which have a really great climate compact group that's working toward addressing sea level rise in a consistent method in that area. So that's why such a broad area was selected, which actually overlaps multiple core projects in Southeast Florida. But it's kind of getting at the bigger picture of what's the shared responsibility to address coastal storms and sea level rise by all stakeholders, and not just what the Corps can do.
Great, thanks, Matt. There was another question back to the sand product. It says, how does sand overlap with COBRA areas and the recent Fish and Wildlife decision to allow federal funds to move COBRA sand to non-COBRA areas?
The sand study does not address that at all. I'll just leave it at that.
Sounds good. The next few, there were a few comments that came in just with some suggested corrections to kind of the labeling and how things were being referenced to specific focus areas. So thank you for submitting those. Our team will kind of review and take those under consideration. Let's see, the next question was, storm surge risk is extremely high in Hancock County, Mississippi. Is the Corps coordinating about plans to the west to build additional levees that models have shown will increase storm surges?
Hey, this is Meredith Ledart. So we do have our Mississippi Coastal Improvements Program that does have a number of authorized projects as well as recommended studies that we have not received funding for. But I believe my email's on the slide, so if there's something specific or a specific project that you have a question about, please reach out to me and we will get that answered for you.
Great. There's a question about whether this PowerPoint will be available. It will be. You'll have that link to the overall SACS website on the last slide, and we'll be planning to post the PowerPoint there following the presentation. Let's see, the next question is thin layer placement authorized throughout the study area or throughout SAD?
Clay, I think that's a question for you relative to some of your discussion on the RSM optimization and some of those efficiencies.
Yeah, sure, Pam. It is authorized where it's a federal standard and cost effective. In some places we do have to get permits, but yes, in general, it's authorized.
And also, this is Matt, we can always partner with other agencies or other stakeholders that would like to beneficially use material that we're dredging for thin layer placement as well.
All right, the next question is, if it is expected that there will be more detailed studies recommended for the key focus areas, similar to as there was under the NAC study.
Yeah, this is Matt. I can take that. So definitely, you know, if you read the authorizing language and the guidance, it does call out that the SACs will recommend future studies that may be warranted, as well as design efforts, et cetera. So future studies can definitely be a recommendation. And again, as I think somebody mentioned it earlier in the discussions, but not just specifically for the focus areas. If there's future studies that look like they could be warranted in areas that are even outside of the focus areas, those recommendations can be made.
Okay. There's a question on what type of data was gathered specifically for saltwater intrusion. Does anyone have examples of that?
I'm not sure. This is Christina May, the environmental lead. I'm not sure if they're talking about the planning aid report or not. But for that report, there was no data or measurements gathered. It was just a qualitative assessment. So Fish and Wildlife Service made a qualitative assessment of the risk to each national wildlife refuge. There was no quantitative analysis.
Okay, next question is, within the specific project areas, do the communities identify how much sand would be required? And if so, how much would come from federal sand borrow sites?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Sure, not sure if that goes back to Clay. It's so within the specific project areas, do the communities identify how much sand would be required? And if so, how much would come from federal sand borrow sites?
Okay, so this is Clay. The answer is yes. We had a lot of stakeholder input and requested input from the stakeholders to define their needs for their individual projects. We got good response on that, but we also went back and worked with our agencies and technical experts to double check those and fill in the gaps. So it was a combination of both the stakeholders and the government team. And so what was the second part of that question?
If sand would come from federal borrow sites.
That all depends. For federal projects, it would. We're specifically looking at the overall needs over the next 50 years to kind of steer where we need to look into the future, and it's a much broader picture rather than just looking specifically at whether it would come from a federal borrow site. If it's a federal project, it probably would. If it's not, it probably won't.
Okay.
Hey, Matt, this is Pam. Do you want to add anything there about the focus area action strategies and how those strategies might address that question?
Just to clarify what you're asking, Pam, how focus area action strategies may provide information on if a federal project will use, if a beach nourishment project will use a specific sand resource?
Well, if a beach nourishment project or projects are located within a focus area action strategy, then the long-term requirements maintenance requirements of that project, obviously come into play and incorporated or rolled into the development of the focus area action strategy, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And so that action strategy would be referencing the work that the SAND report did, maybe going into more detail needed by the stakeholders in the area to kind of refine what that future outlook is, and where potential sources could be. So it could provide some additional clarity, yeah.
Great. The next question is for Meredith. It's more, I think, just for your information. It says the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program is currently in the process of preparing a Western Shore Watershed Management Plan and want to make sure we coordinate with the Army Corps, given their focus on this area. And they're just saying, can they give you a call?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. There's a question on who an attendee should contact if they're interested in attending the ecological workshops.
I would say to email the SACS email box, and I think we're going to have that email address on the last slide.
Yep, we will.
Okay.
There's another.
I also think that the SACS webpage has the contacts for the district project managers, as well as the Command Center team contacts. So I think those are also options as well, depending on where the individual is located.
Okay. The next question was a request to also email out a copy of the presentation. Lisa, we can maybe coordinate on that afterwards, but I would think that shouldn't be a problem. And then also a request to potentially do a webinar on the GeoPortal once it's available.
This is Trevor. Yeah, absolutely. As some of our kind of applications and data sets come online, we can certainly do a specific webinar dedicated to those products.
Let's see, there's a question, is there a combined list of the intermediate requests generated throughout the Tier 2 workshops? I'm not certain
Pam,
exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
Pam, we do have that. We do have an inventory of the interim recommendations that have been provided by the districts. We have not posted those recommendations at this time. We're kind of continuing to work through those, but we do have a fairly complete inventory.
Great. The next question was, what will be the anticipated contents and scope of the draft SACS report? For example, will it include recommendations for areas for additional study, similar to what was done with NACS?
This is Pam. Yes. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, very similar to the previous answer. That if you look at the authority and guidance, some of that information is on the website, but it specifically calls out that the SACS will make recommendations relevant to future studies, additional design considerations, institutional and other barriers, etc. But future study efforts are part of those recommendations.
Okay. This next one was pointed to Ashley. It said that you had referenced that the study authority was used to refine the focus areas. Can additional information be provided that describes the limits of the study authority and how that is influencing the scope of work and focus areas in Puerto Rico, in the U.S. Virgin Islands in particularly, or elsewhere in the SACS?
Yeah, sure. I'll take it. So the study authority kind of has specific direction to identify opportunities to improve resiliency in populated areas, areas with concentrated economic development, and areas with vulnerable environmental resources. So I was just getting at that came into play when we were ultimately making revisions to our draft focus areas.
Okay. There's a question on what is the approach for estimating the future population and assets at risk?
Currently, I believe we use ICLUS to detail what the change in the population is likely to be over time. But in terms of providing an updated or a new structure inventory for this effort, there are no plans to do that to represent future development.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Idris. What Idris just said is correct. Just pointing out that in the Tier 1 risk assessment, it's viewable in the GeoPortal, as well as the HAZUS component of Tier 2, the structural inventory remains the same for existing and future, and that's a conservative estimate. When we're looking out to future conditions, as Idris mentioned, we're looking at the ICLUS data across the entire study area to show future population changes, as well as future development projections out through 2100. Once we get into the focus areas, there'll be some more consideration given to what do the future conditions look like in those areas and what needs to be done to kind of pull that a little bit more into the risk estimate.
Perfect. So there was a question, kind of a clarification on kind of, well, they wanted to know who answered the previous question about the COBRA areas, but I think there was also a more general question previously to just comment generally on any difference between COBRA versus non-COBRA areas in the analysis. Does anyone want to handle that? And was it Clay who was speaking about COBRA if they have more questions?
Yeah, this is Clay. We did not distinguish between COBRA and non-COBRA zones for the SAND study or the optimization. Pam, do you or Matt or anyone want to talk about COBRA zones in general? Or?
So this is Matt. I wrote something in the chat box about COBRA. I wasn't sure if there was a question in there. I didn't know if it was specifically asking about the focus areas and if whether they're COBRA zones or otherwise protected areas, OPA units, whether they came into play. Focus areas weren't developed heavily based on existence or non-existence of the system units. In focus areas, they may come more into play if there's units there or units not there, et cetera. But I guess just my general response is that overall, while they will certainly be mentioned in their efficacy will be mentioned within the SACs, they haven't come into play as far as focus area selection. Christine, I don't know if you had more to provide on the environmental side.
The only thing about COBRA zones is I know they were included in our environmental and cultural index in the Tier 1 risk assessment. I am not sure if they are going to be talked about in our Tier 2 in the environmental sections. That's all I have.
All right, we have a question on how compound flooding risks are being incorporated into the SACS analysis.
This is Pam. I'll take that one on. The scope of the SACS study, in particular relative to the authorizing language, does not provide us with an opportunity to address compound flooding under the scope for this study. It has been noted we did get some fairly consistent feedback at our field workshops that compound flooding is a significant concern that impacts risk within the SACS study area and within tidally influenced areas. That has been noted, and I think a recommendation for, a companion study or a sister study or a follow-on study might be warranted to address that. But at this time, the South Atlantic Coastal Study does not have the resources specifically to delve into compound flooding in this particular product. But again, It's a very good question. It's a very important point. We have acknowledged it, and that is something that at some point in time really does need to be brought to the table when trying to pin down and get a better understanding of overall risk in the coastal zone. Matt, do you have anything else, or Kelly, that you want to add to that?
I would just add, the scope definitely doesn't include the time and funding to do things like additional modeling, et cetera. As far as it being a hazard, and particularly in areas where you have compounding effects of precipitation, or things like in Southeast Florida where you also have groundwater effects, it can certainly be brought in as a hazard, particularly where that information exists. When you get into a focus area, if that information exists as far as it being a compounding hazard, then that can kind of be incorporated into the focus area analysis. One thing that hasn't been focused on, is kind of parallel to this discussion, is that, of course, with a lot of areas around the whole study area, just sea level rise in and of itself is a quote unquote hazard, causing sunny day flooding, et cetera. It's important to note that the SAC's authority and guidance specifically tell us to focus on hurricane and storm damage as increased by sea level rise. So it's not quite pertinent to the question, but it's kind of a parallel idea that in areas where just sea level rise is a major concern, that's, again, something that the study isn't majorly focusing on. Everything has to be drawn back to hurricane and storm damage effects and how they're going to increase the sea level rise. And that's all I had.
Great, thank you. There's a few questions that are kind of, again, seem detailed towards sand studies. One is, are littoral sand flow studies contemplated to potentially support sand collecting and discharging systems, potentially like the streamside technology being used in Galveston, Texas?
Not necessarily in the sand study. We in the RSM optimization, we're looking at riverine sources and inlet sources of sand. We've basically qualified the sand by state definitions, and so for this particular study, we're not looking at those technologies, but overall, RSM in general, we're looking at sand sorting, rock sorting devices, processes during dredging, and technologies like you mentioned there to fill the gap for the sediment deficits that we're seeing throughout the region.
All right, this next one is probably for you as well, Clay. Use of Bahamian sand, particularly for Southeast Florida, where it is less expensive than other alternatives, or their needs outstrip resources northward at the expense of Treasure Coast counties. I might have not read that one the greatest, but did you get a sense of what they were asking?
Yes. We did not assess those sand sources for the sand study. That's the answer for sand. I think Matt may have a little bit to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out there's a limited reevaluation report that was done about 2 or 3 years ago for Dade County that goes into more detail on Bahamian sand. Right now, particularly while it's true that what was stated, there is Bahamian sand out there, considerable resources, potentially cost effective, depending on what costs you're comparing. But right now, particularly the USACE, we're limited that if there are domestic sources available, we need to use domestic sources unless they're not available for economic or environmental reasons. And there's more detail on that given in that date LRR that I mentioned.
Okay, it looks like we've got one more question and we're running into the end of our time, so I think this should work out perfectly. The last question is, how is nature-based or natural infrastructure measured and incorporated into the SACS analysis?
So at this time, there are nature-based features as part of the measures and cost library that are currently being developed and costed out, and judged for applicability and performance. So when we roll out the measures and cost library, nature-based features will be part of that.
And those features will be pulled into focus area analyses as examples, the same way that we would assess structural and non-structural measures.
Well, great. I'm glad we got to make our way through a lot of different questions. Like I think we said multiple times, I'm sure the team is happy to take additional questions via the project website. I'll put that up now, and then maybe Pam, do you have any closing comments?
Okay, thank you, Jenny. And again, I'm really appreciative of all the comments and the questions that came in. This last half an hour or so, I think has been really productive. And you know, your questions, your feedback really helps us. This study is a partnered effort with you, and your comments will help us to ensure that our products are validated and of use to you when they're completed. So that really is our goal, and we appreciate the time that you've taken in signing on this morning, listening, your interest in getting a study update, and your feedback over the course of this last half an hour. So again, I encourage you all, if you have additional comments and questions, and given, actually I see that a couple may have just come in now, send those in, please. We will ensure that any comments or questions that come in that weren't addressed today, we provide answers for, and we post the list of the Q&As on our webpage so that we do have an opportunity to respond back to all the questions that came in. So again, thank you very, very much for your time today. We look forward to continuing to interacting with you, meeting with you, and keeping you at the table with us as we move forward in completion of our products. So thank you again. Jenny?
That was a great wrap up. So I think we're gonna sign off. We'll definitely send out this presentation and post it to the website. But please join us for the next quarterly webinar. And we look forward to talking to you then.